Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of Your Life and host of this podcast, Incredible Life Creator. And today I have with me Corey Poirier. Hey, Corey.
Hello, hello. How are you doing today?
I am good. We've had you on before because you have a lot of wisdom to share, and now you have a new book out, The Enlightened Passenger, The Flight That Changes Everything.
Yeah, I hope it is the flight that changes things for people. But yes, new book out, fictional parable. I've been working on it, let's say, for 3 years since the conception of the idea to a year later finally actually writing the first word, to a year later finally writing the last word of the rough draft, to a year later finally holding the book. For if it is on video in my hands, people can see the book, but holding the book in my hands, it took a little over 3 years, I believe. So yeah, it's been a long time in the coming. Now, that doesn't probably seem like a long time if you go back in history of books, but for me, it feels like a long time because I'm a person that struggles with patience when it comes to something you're excited about.
Exactly. Yeah. And now this is a fictional parable. Is this the first time you've done fictional parable? Have you done that before?
I've done it once before. It's funny because people will say to me, "Is this your first solo book?" Sorry, I'll correct that. Is this your first book? And actually, my wife yesterday on Father's Day said to my kids, she was trying to do a quiz with them, like, "Did you know that Daddy did this or whatever?" And she said, "Ask Daddy how many books he wrote." And I struggle with that honestly because there's different questions or there's different uh, angles or contexts around that. For example, if you say how many books have been involved in, the number is 38. But if you ask how many books I wrote solo, it comes down to about 8. But 5 of those were you do interview, like basically profiles of other people. So I don't consider that being a solo book. So then I'm down to 3. And so I'm getting to a point here. 2 of them have been available for sale. So in other words, this is only the second book I've ever had available for sale. And the last book was launched on the day the pandemic was announced, or sorry, the pandemic was called a pandemic. So that's hard to compete with. So I feel like this is the first book I've ever truly launched of my own. However, the interesting part is of those 3 books that I was down to, one of the other 2 was a parable. So I actually wrote a parable before about customer service. So it was about stand-up comedy. A guy wants to learn how to get standing ovations so he can bring that into his big box store and get a promotion. He takes a comic out for supper 4 nights, learns the 4 separate steps the comic uses to get a standing ovation, and then he basically tries to employ that in his own career. That was my first parable, and I never sold a copy intentionally. So that's why I say this is the first book for sale that's a parable. But what I did was I had sent it to thought leaders and CEOs and managers in hopes that they would say, we need this guy to bring the same insight into our company. So it was like a mailer book. It was meant to be like a fancy business card, but it was really thought out, and I did a lot of work writing it. So I feel it was a well-written book, but it really was meant to be a great business card. This is the first true parable I'm writing that's meant to be a book to hopefully change the world. So I know that was a long answer, but I want it to be an accurate answer. So that's the long, accurate answer about this is my first fictional parable that I've ever sold.
Right. So just give us a brief summary because we'll get into it deeper, but give us a brief summary of what this book is, who it's for, why you wrote it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so the book itself is about 2 strangers on a plane. The young stranger's name is Robert, and Robert has a career that pays him a lot of money, but he doesn't really manage his money well. So he always wants to make more. And I think this even is intentional because when you're younger like that, when I was that same age, you don't think, how can I stop spending some of this? You think, how can I make more of this? And so it's meant to be intentional that that's his mindset. Also, he's not well, he's slightly arrogant, but and I think he thinks he's better than people, but really it's that he also has the I already knew this hat on. Like in other words, I can't learn from anybody else. He doesn't know what self-help is, personal development. And honestly, that's loosely based on my life. So I wasn't arrogant. Um, I wasn't always saying, how can I make more? But I still was that person that didn't really understand personal development. And he sells digital devices like printers and copiers, and I sold copiers for a living. So there's parts that's loosely based on my life, but that's Robert. And he pays for the seat next to him in first class because he doesn't want anybody seated next to him. He wants to get some work done. And he falls asleep for a bit and he wakes up to an old man sitting next to him on the plane. And the old man says, I can't help it. I was bumped, like the plane was sold out. So Robert's like, I'm just going to fall asleep and ignore this guy. but he gets wind of the fact that the guy is actually financially successful. And so Robert then thinks, what can I learn from this old geezer? He doesn't say those words, but that's really what he's saying. So he kind of thinks, I'll just placate him. I'll just listen to him for a little bit, get what I can, and then go to sleep. What happens is, instead of Robert learning how to become more rich with money, he learns how to become a richer person overall. And that's why it's the flight that changes everything. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the book's about. And it's 10 life lessons that I've learned during 7,500 interviews with thought leaders. And the way it's also loosely based on my life is a lot of those modern day thought leaders are referenced in the book. So for example, if I sat in Les Brown's living room and he told me synchronicity is God's way of staying anonymous, then in the book, Treb, the older character, says, when I was backstage in the green room with Les Brown, he told me synchronicity is God's way of staying anonymous. So the stuff really happened. So it's almost like a fictionalized version of my life.
Oh, that sounds really cool. And I love that form of business or life book because you can read it and you're following along with the story as opposed to here's the 3 steps to you know, and you're reading a nonfiction book. I just
Right.
love those fictional books because you really think about it. And when they say stories sell, and it is true, whether it's a parable or true story, we are attracted to a story. Our mind stays engaged with the story, as opposed to if you said all the same things in a nonfiction book. You could have
Yeah.
quoted the people and said, this is what they said, and then your take on it. But no, you put it into a parable, which I think is delightful.
Well, I mean, thank you so much. And I will say, yeah, that again, that part's intentional. For me, books that changed my life, both I nonfiction, many books that changed my life, like Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends and Influence People. These books changed my life. But uh, um, the books that, and those 2 books stand out. But outside of those 2 nonfiction books, the books that really stand out as having a major impact on my life were The Alchemist, The Celestine Prophecy, anything Og Mandino wrote, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. They're all parables. And so what I found is, this is my funny way of saying it, but it's true. I get tricked into learning because I was immersed in the story. And then by the time I was done, I was like, wow, I never thought about doing that before. Wow, I should try this. But it was never said, you know, I'll correct this. It was never said explicitly like, do this. Now,
Mhm.
the one thing we did in this book, which was a conscious decision, but we were back and forth. Um, basically, one thing we did was trying to think of the best way to say how we did it, but we basically were on the fence between whether or not we should list lessons in the book. Like, in other words, lesson 1 is at the end of the chapter. But then I started thinking about who this book was written for, and partially who it was written for is the spiritual skeptic who's never done this stuff before. And I thought those people might need to see a lesson when you're talking about synchronicity, because they need it to sound practical, and a lesson makes it practical.
Mhm.
Whereas if you just leave it as, if when you run into a person, like in the story, I ran into a person and I realized they might have a message for me. So I stopped them and sat down. Well, if you don't say, your takeaway is, write in a synchronicity journal. When you see somebody 3 times, stop and ask them what news they have for you, that type of thing. Ultimately, I felt those lessons needed to be outlined because of who the audience was. But then I also looked at it and said, the Monk Who Sold His Ferrari did that. The Alchemist didn't, and Celestine didn't, but the Monk Who Sold His Ferrari did. And most of Og Mandino's books, when he was about 10 scrolls, he showed the 10 scrolls in the book. And so I think I went back and forth, but I feel like we made the right decision that if you're a spiritual skeptic, it's going to be hard for you to hear that story and then say, what do I do with it? You're still going to say, how do I apply this though? This seems so abstract. And so that's why we did include lessons in the book, but they're at the very end of the chapter. We didn't, all the way through say, do this. Treb did also say, are you ready for the 5th lesson? So we kept track that way as well. So it was kind of a mix between both, I guess, is what I can say.
Yeah, and I love that. Even what is the richest man in Babylon? It kind of does that, where it's a parable, it's a story about this guy and his friends, but at the end it'll kind of say this was the lesson, at the end. So it's really, really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that was the intention for sure.
Mhm. And what was the challenge of doing a parable as opposed to nonfiction? So with a parable, you have to think of conversation and how to write that. And And how does your mind think differently writing that?
I went through a process that I'll start that over. I mean, at the end of the day, um, ultimately I went through the idea of I'm going to sit down and see what comes to life. And then I sat down and basically started typing. So it's a bit different. Like I don't do some people do like index cards on a wall and all this stuff. I don't do that stuff. I literally just sit down and start writing, basically. And then it comes together, and I don't want to jinx myself, but I don't have writer's block and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just basically sit down and start writing, and life happens, basically.
Okay. So let me ask you some of the things in the book. So you talked about synchronicities. Talk about synchronicities.
Yeah. So synchronicity ultimately, to me, is here's the best way I can essentially I guess best way to probably describe it would be it's like coincidence, but it has meaning to it. So I would say for skeptics, more powerful language would be meaningful coincidences. You know, I think that helps because then we don't have to fight as about whether or not it's a coincidence or not. It's meaningful coincidences. And that way we can say, well, some of them maybe are just coincidences, and some of them you can place meaning to it. The ones you place meaning to it, let's call it a synchronicity. So it feels like, wow, it's almost like a deja vu, right? Like, wow, this seems to just fit. Like it feels like, as an example, I'll give you an example too, but it feels like, how could this happen in what somebody's lifetime once, let alone many times? And so it could be as simple as I was trying to think of what happened on Friday. It was Friday, yeah. So on Friday, I was showing I think I just saw it. I have it on my desk here. I had this chip, and it was something I had made. E plus R equals O stands for event plus response equals outcome. I actually talked about it in the book. And basically it just says that you can't control the event, but you can control the response, and it'll dictate the outcome. And so basically, if the price of gas goes up, you get to choose how you respond. It'll dictate a certain outcome. And so that chip gets to control that, or sorry, that chip reminds me that I get control over how I respond to things. But I showed it on a call on Friday, an interview I had with Randy Spelling from 90210, Brian Austin Green from 90210 and Anger Management, and Sharna Burgess, Brian's wife from Dancing with the Stars. And when I showed it, I literally I was just about to show the chip, and Randy said, I was just about to start saying, we were away, and he goes, let me guess, Vegas. Now, he didn't know from Vegas. He said, and I said, why'd you say that? He goes, because Vegas popped into my mind. And then I said, you're not going to believe this. I was holding this chip. What I'm saying is that would be something that's like a synchronicity. Or, I mean, that's a random one, but it could be I've seen the same person 8 times this month, and I never seen them before. That could be described as a synchronicity. I had one recently where actually a similar poker chip. I have 2 of them. The other one is this PMA, which stands for positive mental attitude. I did a talk at the University of Miami. One of the ladies in the audience was blown away by the chip concept, but didn't know what it stood for. I just said PMA. I didn't have the chip. I thought I didn't have it with me. And then I went to my bag to get a pen for somebody who needed a pen to write on the evaluation forms. And out came this chip. And I brought it over to her. I said, you were asking about it. Now the event's over. And I said, you're asking about it. And she said, can I guess what PMA stands for? And she tried to guess for 5 minutes. She didn't get it, but she was close. And I said, do you want the chip? And I gave it to her. And during their conversation for the next couple of minutes, she started to cry. I was like, oh my God, what did I do? What happened? And she said, I wasn't even thinking about this, but she said, I lost my partner 6 months ago from an overdose. And he was in the program, AA. And the last chip he showed me was a red chip for him having 60 days. And now you just gave me a red chip. And she said, to me, that means he's reminding me I'm still here watching over you. That's a synchronicity to me. And what I'm saying is I have those things happen, quite honestly, Kimberly, like 6 times a week. Things like that. That's monumental. That probably shouldn't only happen once every year or maybe once in your lifetime. But I have them all the time. And I think it's because I write in a synchronicity journal. So it's like I'm telling the universe, I want more of these things. So ultimately, to me, that's both how I describe synchronicity, which is meaningful coincidences. And then those are some examples of meaningful coincidences.
Exactly. So talk about journaling. There's some people that they are, adamant they're going to do their journaling every day. Why do you journal? What do you journal?
Yeah. So, great question. So for me, so I there's two sides, right? There's the synchronicity journal, which is I just literally write down synchronicities that happen to me. So that's one side. Journaling on the other side, and I struggled with this for years because I like to have like something practical, like, okay, here's the 5 things I write every day. So that's probably why I like the gratitude side of my journal, because I can literally say, okay, I'm going to write 1 thing I'm grateful for today, or 3 things. So, but it's still almost methodology or a system that you can use. But journaling for me personally has been a struggle because it's not just cut and dry. So what I try to do is I try to make it more about what am I going to do today? And then at the end of the day, reflecting, how did today go? So
Mhm.
I just write about that because I found it too hard to try to be abstract and go like, I'm just going to write what comes to my mind and then just keep writing. Like, I know that's what a lot of people do. So it's almost like a daily diary for them. For me, that doesn't work so great. So I decided personally that I would just start going, okay, beginning of the day, what am I going to do? End of the day, how did it go? Essentially.
And that's good to assess that, because then you can be thinking, while you're sleeping, okay, how do I want my day to be different or the same? What things did I like? Which things did I not like? Which things I'm going to repeat? Which things I'm not going to repeat?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And I mean, so it does become an ongoing board for me as well
Mhm.
to, like to keep track of how things are going.
Exactly. So, another thing in your book, what's the most important word in the English language?
Uh, so I mean, it goes both ways because there's actually I'm going to say a second one that I believe, well, Dale Carnegie said is the most important word of the English language. My most important English language is mindset. So it goes back to what I just showed you literally with those 2 coins. E
Hmm.
plus R equals O, that's about mindset. Like, how am I going to respond? And PMA, positive mental attitude, of course, is about mindset. So to me, what I've discovered, and I've done, as I said, 7,500 interviews to research this, is what I've discovered is that mindset is everything. It's the only thing I mean, yes, we get control over our decisions, but mindset is the only thing I believe that we can control, which can have an positive or negative impact solely because of what we chose to do with that, meaning with our mindset. And so to me, the most powerful word in the English language is mindset. Dale Carnegie says it's the sound of our own name to the average person.
Mhm.
So he believes, like, if your name's Rebecca, that's the most important word in the English language to you. I get why he says that, but there's a lot of people I know, like me, who you could call me Chris, and I don't get it doesn't bother me at all.
Right.
So if you can call me Chris and it doesn't bother me, then obviously it's not the most important word to me. And so I would say mindset is more important because it's not that the word is important, it's what it means that's important. So again, that's my take after all these interviews, that I've discovered the one thing that these thought leaders have in common is they have a certain mindset that they work on every day. Having said that, I also will say that I also don't believe in absolutes. So that's a challenge sometimes because I think a lot of people will, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, but let's say on the spiritual side, we'll say, um, I've got it all figured out. So I'll see people that'll say, what happens after we die is this. Well, how many people have died to prove that for us?
Hmm.
Like, meaning, like, most of the people have died for 3 minutes, and there's not many of them.
Hmm.
So for people to say, who've never talked to those people, never asked them what they saw, and then say, this is what happens after you die. This is just my opinion. I think that's a belief. I think you
Mhm.
believe that's what happens after you die. But a lot of people say it with so much conviction that they tell other people, this is what happens, but they've never experienced it. And
Mhm.
it's like the same to me as saying, this is exactly what that synchronicity means, or this is what that dream you had means when I interpret your dream. To me, that's what you believe it means. So when I say this, I want to be clear as well, Kimberly, that anything I share is based on what I've learned, what I've studied. It doesn't make it fact. So it's like, it's basically the mindset is the most powerful word based on what I've seen.
Mhm.
Like, facts are more like I throw a ball in the air, and as long as there's no other obstruction and it has some weight to it, it's going to come back down.
Mhm.
That's a fact. But for me to say, this is what happens when you use your mindset, is not a fact. mean, there's been studies done on it, but what I'm saying is for me just to say this is the most powerful word, that's my belief. Dale Carnegie's belief is it's the sound of a person's first name. So I just like to clarify that because sometimes I think we follow people falsely thinking that everything they teach is meant to be gospel. And, I want to say that what I'm sharing in this book are the lessons that I would want to teach my kids, and they're based on what I've learned over the years, but it doesn't mean it's the right thing for that person.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So since there are so many people throwing the word around mindset, what is your definition of mindset?
So my definition of mindset, I could use like what comes to me literally is how you set your mind, meaning like your blueprint, like what do you have your mindset on? What's his name? T.R. Becker used to say that if you have a money blueprint, if nothing else changes, and he sees how much money you have in the bank now and how much money cash you have on hand, he can tell you in 10 years, within $100, how much you'll be worth, if nothing else changes. So to me, that's a set point. You have a money set point. Well, I think we have a mindset point, and we get to either choose if it stays there or we change it. Now, it could be already on the perfect mindset. You might not need to change it. But to me, it's basically, where's your mindset in general? And then the caveat or the add to that is, what are you going to feed your mind to change that, for better or worse? In the sense that you have these thoughts based on what you've learned in the previous years. You have these beliefs, you have these behavioral motions that you do because of what you believe. And I believe that's your mindset today.
Mhm.
I believe you can reset your mind. I'm playing off the word set, but you can reset your mind by inputting different things. And again, that could be for better or worse. If you say every day, man, I'm going to have another bad day today, or crap, I'm in sales, I'm going to be rejected as soon as I walk through that door, then you're setting your mind. If you think about the best day you've ever had in your life before you walk through that door to make a sales call, you're probably going to have a different mindset because you put yourself into a place of abundance happens for me, good things happen to me. And so I believe we can set our mind. And I also believe it's right now set at whatever you brought it to this point. But it's really, to me, it's what do you think about everything that happens to you, and what do you think about everything you do, and where's your mind at in relation to those? I mean, I haven't really ever sat down to describe it before, so that would be off top of my head. And then I will say, when I say what you feed your mind, there's a great term in a book called The Magic of Thinking Big from the 50s, and he calls it mind food. So I think that's like what you feed your mind. And here's one thing I'll add to that. I find it fascinating sometimes that we put so much value and focus on what we feed our body, but so little on what we feed our mind.
Exactly. And a lot of it has to do with what we put our attention on,
Absolutely.
whatever we're attending to at the moment. Because we think we can attend to a lot of things at one time, but we really don't. We think we're multitasking, but we're really not. We're attending to one thing, one primary thing, and then the other things are just like in the background. So if what
Absolutely.
we're attending to is going in the direction that we want, then we're going to get the results we want.
Absolutely. 100%.
And I wanted to ask you also, as far as interacting with other people. So you've interacted with a lot of different people, and you've learned these lessons, and you've gotten into rooms where a lot of people would love to be. What is your I guess secret? How do you get in contact with the people that you've gotten in contact with? How do you get yourself, because it's really about yourself and getting yourself to be the right person. So how did you get yourself to be the right person to get into rooms with these people? And then once you did, how did you do that?
Um, Honestly, I mean, it's only a big question because the answer is multifaceted, meaning like it's not just one thing I did. Having said that, when it first started, I made a list of 100 people that I wanted to get in their sphere of influence. The top one on the list, the first name was Jack Canfield from Chicken Soup for the Soul. And he became my first big quote unquote get. And so his was very, I'm going to call it strategic around how I got an interview with him. So basically, with Jack, what I did was I reached out at first, and they said Jack's turning down 9 out of every 10 interviews. He's not marketing or promoting anything right now, so he's kind of behind the scenes. And I just decided that that wasn't a good answer for me. So I mean, I just was patient. I reached out each month. By the 4th month, I took a different approach. I said, you know what? I'm going to go see who endorsed Jack on his page because he probably respects them. What if I can reach them and then get to Jack that way? And I found this guy named Dan Sullivan, who has a company called Strategic Coach. Dan's more behind the scenes. And so I heard Dan on Success Magazine's interview for the month with Darren Hardy. He said it was his favorite interview. So I thought that Darren interviews just like me. And so I reached out to his team and said, hey, Dan liked the interview style. Here's a clip of me, similar style. Would Dan like to come on the show? They said yes. And I got Dan on the show and I kept bringing up Jack. And I found out that Jack and Mark Victor Hansen, Jack's old writing partner, would pay $25,000 once a year to go to Dan's conference. And so Dan was basically their coach. And so Dan said a couple times in the interview, you need to bring Jack on the show. He'd love the show. And the second time he said, and tell him Dan said so. So I took that clip and I sent it to Jack's team. I said, even Dan, Jack's coach, thinks Jack should be on my show. And they replied with you've beaten us into submission, Corey. Here's Jack's scheduling link. So that was a very strategic one. Then what happened after that is then I had Dan and Jack. Then I could go to Mark Victor Hansen and say, hey, I interviewed your 2 friends. Mark, would love to have you on the show. And then, Mark's like, okay, sounds good. And then I go to Mark and Jack and Dan's pages and see who endorses them. And then I start making those my next hits, if you want to call it that. And then I go basically interview as many of those as I can. And all of a sudden, then I have like 10 people, like Janet Atwood from the Passion Test, Ken Honda, Mark Victor Hansen, Jack Canfield. And all of a sudden, I call it dominoes now. All of a sudden, you've had 10 big dominoes knocked down. It's so much easier to knock down the 11th now. What I mean by that's the metaphor, but it's so much easier to go to the next one though and say, hey, here's some of the people we've had on the show. Love to have you on. And then they kind of look and go, okay, well, if Jack and Mark and everybody else, my friends, trust them, then what's it going to hurt? And so now when people say, and it gets harder, by the way, it seems like it should get easier, but I'm going for bigger names and it gets harder and harder. But when you start being able to send a clip, like I have a promo clip that has like Gary V, so Gary Vaynerchuk on it, Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong, Brian Austin Green from 90210, Dave Hester from the Storage Wars, guy, John Hester from, I think I said that, but Bar Rescue, I mean. And then on the leadership side, like Jack Canfield, Les Brown, Lisa Nichol, Deepak Chopra. And so I have all of them on a promo clip talking about my interview skills and style and what have you. And so obviously it gets a lot easier when you can send a video that's 5 minutes and they can literally see 80 big name thought leaders with you. Then it's a comfort, like, well, in some ways I had one say one time, when I saw your video, I'm like, well, how am I missing out? Why am I not on there? And so I think just over time, this is, building it takes time, but over time, it's that domino effect. Now I've knocked down enough dominoes. It gets a little easier to knock down the tougher dominoes. I will say there's other variables. One's patience, because the bigger the name, the longer it takes to schedule. So Brian Austin Green, it took us 4 or 5 months. And even though Randy was the one that connected us, it took us 4 or 5 months to finally lock it down. And then how it happened, and this is flexibility, is Brian messaged me and it was out of the blue. And he said, Corey, so sorry I've been in absence. I've been doing this. And it was like he was on Comic-Con tour with 90210. He was doing they're doing a remake of the show. They did like a 1-season thing. Also, though, he was on, what was it called? Something Force. And it was like a reality show in the middle of nowhere. Like he was doing a lot of, things that are going to keep you busy. And he messaged me, said, sorry, I've been so out of the loop. Let's try to make this happen. And I said, you're not going to believe this, but I literally landed in LA yesterday and we're doing our UCLA event tomorrow and the next day. I also know this is short notice, but up for being interviewed. And he goes, yeah, I'd love that. So then he drove in to the UCLA event. We interviewed him live, but it took 4 months and I had to be flexible. Like that meant I had to go to Heidi on my team and say, Heidi, how can we move the day to fit Brian in? Because we already had a full packed schedule. So there's that side. And then the final piece I would say about how to get big name influencers to work with you, listen to you, what have you. And this is the non-sexy one nobody wants to hear. It's not the strategy. I guess it is, but it's not really meant to be. I look at it like a bank, a relationship bank. And I look at it like most people, what they want to do is they want to go to that bank and they want to withdraw the first day. I don't have any credits or money built up, but I want to take money out. So I'll put in a fake envelope with a number on it and pretend I have the money in the envelope to pull out of the account. So like the fake could be, I really loved your book, even though I haven't read it. I really loved your book. I'd like to get you on my show to introduce you to my audience. But deep down, they're going, I'd love to get you on my show so that I can get more listeners on my show. Or really loved your book. Wondering if you want to endorse mine. You know, that type of thing. That's to me withdrawing before you deposit it. I do the opposite, probably to the extreme. So like I mentioned Mark Victor Hansen. And so Mark, whenever we first did the first interview, I interviewed him, aired the interview, promoted it, kept tagging him in so he knew I was promoting it more than normal, and then left it be for 2 years. Never talked to him again for 2 years. And then I don't remember who reached out, him or me, but they had a book coming out. It was near the pandemic. It was called Ask, and they were launching just after the pandemic. So it was, they wanted to do a lot of podcasts. And so he came on, did the show with me, him and Crystal, his wife. And he said, Corey, at the end of the episode, on the air though, if you know of any other podcasts that we should be on, let me know. So I went to work, and about 2 days later, I sent him a list of 25 top podcasts. You know, some of these had 2 million listeners, some of them are in the top 1%. And then after I gave him those 25, they were scheduling those. And then I was like, okay, here's some more. And he goes, okay, enough. That's all we can take for now. But my point is, out of that is, now I'm 2.5 years into knowing Mark. And at this point, I've still never asked for a thing, and I'm giving. And then we were working on a documentary that got really paused because of COVID, but I didn't think it was going to. And so I reached out to Mark and Crystal and said, love to feature in this documentary. Basically, if it blows up big, it could go to Netflix or Hulu. You could be seen in front of 1 million people, similar to The Secret. And he's like, oh my God, I'd love that. So again, that's giving. And so I did probably 5 things like that, Kimberly. And then we were doing an event at MIT. And I said, hey, Mark, we're doing an event at MIT. I'd love to feature you. And I will say this is the first time that, you know, I think it's a, you know, also I'm trying to kind of make it so that our audience gets the win and all that. So I kind of let him know it was kind of like the first ask after the 5 gives or whatever. And basically, I won't say a whole lot of details, but I wanted to pay him because somebody else asked me how much he would charge them to do like a mastermind virtually. And I told him the price. And so I thought, well, what he normally charges, I mean, I want to pay him something to be fair, because now he's doing a favor for me. And all I'll say is he took a minimal amount just because he was turning down a booking to do ours, but it was very minimal. And I was like basically really trying to encourage, like I was saying, no, I really want to pay you. I want to have a good energy exchange. What I'm saying is he had a hard time taking anything. And I think it's because I gave 5 times before I asked. Then I gave another 2 times again. I reached out and said, hey, do you guys want to be in more podcasts? I interviewed him in Scottsdale. We're going to send him a video soon. So he's going to have this highly polished video they can use. And then I said, hey, Mark, I got my new book coming out. Now we full circle back to the book. Is there any way you'd be up for endorsing it if you liked it? Because that's another thing. I'm not a big fan of, you know, you just saying words about a book you never read. And he said, well, tell me what the book's about. So I went through and we spent time on the phone and I told him. And he goes, okay, got it. He said, I'm Augie, meaning Og Mandino, was a really a good friend of mine. I loved his work. This sounds like his book. I'm happy to endorse it. So then he said, turn on your phone and record this. So he gave me an audio of the endorsement. And so we put it in the book. And then him and Crystal read the whole book. I sent them copies. And then we just did an event last Friday with Richard Paul Evans, who wrote the foreword for the book, together. And that was the first time they'd ever done anything together, I think. But on it, Mark and Crystal said they read the book and they were, you know, so glad Mark said he did the endorsement because he said it's perfect. It's a short book, what have you. I bring this all up to say, and if you listen to that whole story, this is now encompassing almost 4 years, maybe close to 5. And I've asked twice and I've given about 7 times. So the non-sexy answer that nobody wants to hear, and this relates to any relationship, not just influencer relationship, is that you got to look at it like a bank and you have to be willing to deposit before you expect to withdraw. You need to make sure that when you're withdrawing, you're not depleting it. And also you're not withdrawing before you have money in there and going into overdraft. So in other words, what I do is I put so much into it that when I've taken those 2 withdrawals, I technically probably still have 5 more asks, which I won't do. It'll take me 20 years to ask. I'll only ask if it's a big ask, which by the way, full circles back to why when people say, hey, I want to get Lisa Nichols on my show, can you give me her number? It's a hard no, because I have maybe 5 asks in my life and I can't for every person that I know say, hey, can I give this person your contact info? But they're not even wanting me to do that. They want me just to look at my phone and say, here's someone's number. And to me, I worked really hard to build that relationship. So having said that, I don't, depending on the person, I don't mind saying, hey, Kimberly wants, I was talking to Kimberly, or I was on Kimberly's show. I think you'd be a great fit. Are you looking to be on shows? If so, can I connect you? That's a different thing. But somebody reaching out to me and saying, hey, can you send me over Mark Victor Hansen's phone number? That's a total different thing. And I think personally, because of that approach, makes me not want to send the number.
Mm-hmm.
But if a person says to me, I'm trying to build up my show, I need a couple of big influencers on it. Who could you recommend? So in other words, instead of saying, get me Deepak Chopra, if they say, who could you recommend? Then I'll think of, okay, who do I know that is always open to interviews and I've asked before and are cool with it. And then if I get them a few of those names, then it's easier for me to go to that next tier of name and say, hey, I have this friend, she's interviewed these 3 people who I know, they loved the interview. Did you want to be on the show? But yeah, it has to be done in a certain way because I've made a lot of deposits into these banks. So hopefully that's a well-rounded but long answer.
It is a great answer, and I think people need to understand that and that happens, like you said, in every relationship. Every relationship, we need to be the person we, want to connect with. We need to be that person, and then it has to be an even exchange in some way. And I just love that, because a lot of times you wonder, well, how can I, this person's doing this over here, like the 90210 people. I mean, they're popular, they're known, people are trying to give them things all the time, and you think, how can I give? So it just helps you to be more creative and think, okay, what does this person need? How can I give to them? So I love that answer.
Well, thank you so much. And it's the true answer too.
Yes. So what else about the book should we know?
I think that, I kind of said these in passing, but I think it's important that it is truly based on 7,500 interviews. So if you want to know what the top leaders do, we'll maybe say the luminaries, the people you want to become do, it's in the book. Also, I think it's important to know that these lessons are the lessons that I've said that if I was in a room locked with my kids for 24 hours and could only teach them 10 things, I literally took lessons out that didn't feel like they were the 10 things. So it's really been thought over what we're teaching you in it. Also, I will tell you that because I mentioned it's a fictional parable, some people, and then I mentioned synchronicity, some people could be thinking, oh, it's a spiritual book. And what I will say to that is, yes, and it's also a business book, and it's also a practical book. So The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma is definitely a spiritual book, but it's also stuff that you can use, like he talks about journaling in it. It's also stuff you would use personally as well. And so with this book, I want people to know there's a lot of practical, and in fact, it's written from a spiritual skeptic's point of view. So if you think this stuff is witchcraft or pseudoscience, good, because so does Robert in the story. And so what I try to do is I try to be very practical around stuff that demonstrates to you that there is something else there. So for example, it could be like when you walk into an elevator and you can tell if a couple was fighting, or when you walk into an elevator and you can tell if a couple was kissing. Like those things you can tell and you can feed it. Just like a dog won't let one person in the air but lets everybody else. Just like a baby won't let one person hold them but lets everybody else. If you don't believe that's energy, what else is it? Mm-hmm. And so what I'm saying is the book is kind of from that perspective, but then also it's very practical stuff. For instance, one thing in it is the power of no, which I'm now starting to call the supernatural power of no. But basically what I've learned is thought leaders that are busy say no on average 20 to 50 times more than the average person. So they say no to everything that doesn't move the needle so they can say yes to the few things that do. And so in the book, we talk about how to say no, how to know what a no is, and how to do it without burning a bridge. And then also in that same section, we talk about why everybody should have a personal mission statement. So my personal mission statement is to be the guy who motivates, donates, educates, entertains, and inspires. And knowing that allows me to say, if somebody says, will you do this? I can say that's an easy no or an easy yes based on what this is. How does it line up with those 5 things? And so I carry that in my wallet. And so what I would argue is those things I just shared are very practical for business, for life, everything. And then synchronicity is a little more on the spiritual side. So if you like spirituality, it's in there. If you don't and you like practical, it's in there as well. And in fact, throughout the whole book, Robert's like, get to the practical stuff. Like he's even impatient around the spiritual stuff. But again, I think that's how a spiritual skeptic is. So I define myself or describe myself as a recovering spiritual skeptic. And so I still struggle with certain things. Like when people say, I saw somebody astral project up to the moon and come back. I struggle with that. Or somebody that says to me, there's nothing physically impossible in the world. And I would argue that again, yes, you may be able to astral project up to the moon. I can't argue that. But what I can argue is physically as matter, you can't stand on the ground and go like that and fly up to the moon physically in front of me and back again. That's not possible. Maybe it will be someday, but right now that's physically impossible. So I don't even believe that term that we say nothing's impossible. I just believe that most things are possible, or many, but I'll say most even. But there are things that just physically aren't possible. Like a person that's 3.5 feet that I know of can't dunk yet on a regulation basketball net. Now, that's not going to mean that's not going to happen in the future. And there was a basketball player named Spud Webb who used to be 4 foot something, I think 10, and he used to win dunking contests.
Wow.
Maybe we'll break that barrier, right? It's like the 1 minute mile. Like nobody could do it for years, and then one person did it, and then with the next year, like 27 people did it. So I'm not going to say someday, Kimberly, we can't just fly up to the moon. I'm not saying we can't. I'm saying right now, physically with your body, I haven't seen it yet.
That's right.
So if you're a spiritual skeptic, you can probably hear my voice. This is for you.
All right. Well, so everyone should go and get this book. I'll have a link in the show notes so you can find the book and get it. So now I have a couple questions. The last two I ask everybody on the podcast. It's a personal question. What gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life right now?
Right now. I mean, there's the personal answer and then the non-personal answer. I mean, the personal answer would be my family. That's the easy, I mean, but it's the easy low-hanging fruit answer. Yesterday was Father's Day. We spent the day together. I do enjoy that I get a life where I mix work and like, to me, work is not work. So I love doing what I do. So I mix that with business. And so I have no, like, what would you call it? Start and stop. Like I have no like balance, and I don't want to, because I think that is balance when you love what you do all day, every day. But because of that, if I need to, I can have an afternoon with my kids. Like the weekends, I hardly ever turn on the laptop. Sometimes I'll check messages, but I hardly ever turn on the laptop. And so that side, my easy answer would be my kids and my wife, my family. But if I said what brings me the most joy outside of that, I mean, again, a blanket answer would be everything I get to do every day. But right now, presently, I feel like it's when you get a message from somebody. Right now, it's the book, but it could be from a speaking engagement, anything like that. When you get a message from somebody and they say, this changed my life, or this thing you did had an impact on me. Or we have it's called the Experts Bureau, where we help people get media and speaking engagements and bookings. And when I get, like this morning, I got to send an email saying, here's our recent wins. Like, here's what people had. And I sent out, there were, like, in the last 6 days, we had 3 people end their TEDx talk. We had a person get a major book deal with a traditional publisher, person get approved for Authority magazine, a person get a paid speaking engagement, and I think it was like 20 people get interviews. That's like less than 7 days. Oh, and a Fox interview aired for one of ours, and another one just got selected to be on Fox. That's, like I say, in 7 days. And then to that email, one person replied, said, Corey, I don't know if you saw the post, but I landed my TEDx too. So I even missed one. So 4 TEDx's in a week. Like when I get messages like that saying, this is going to change everything, that brings me joy, because it tells me that what I'm doing has purpose. Like when you're, because TEDx is, quite honestly, or even my Blue Talks that I've done, our own brand, have changed my life. So, and then, or one person, okay, so this is wild. Yesterday, this one guy who was in the book, I didn't realize how much it meant to him. Some of them join and then write the chapter for the book, never say much about it until it's out. And then I realize how big a deal. So this one guy, he put a post, because we put a special feature from Bob Proctor, my interview with him, and then the forward by Anthony Trucks. And so he really is like, he was a big Bob Proctor fan. So even just to know it was like a 1 page, he keeps talking about, I co-authored a book with Bob Proctor. So, but what I'm meaning is he put 2 posts up, or 3, in the last couple of days, and the book's been out for like a month now. So that's why it threw me. And he had a picture yesterday of his father reading his book, like reading our book, Blue Talks, and his chapter, him reading his son's manuscript or screenplay, and his son reading his manuscript for his book. And it was the 3 generations on the couch. And he said, you have no idea how much this means for my father to be alive and see that I'm a best-selling author. What I'm saying is, I didn't even know that meant that much to him. But that's what brings meaning to me, like to know that now is a title he can carry for the rest of his life. And I will say it never is the same as your first time. You know, like whenever you become a best-selling author, whenever you do a TEDx, the first one's always the one that's the most special because you never have that new feeling again.
Mhm.
So it's cool to know we gave that to him for however long that lasts. And to see that picture is pretty epic. It's iconic to see like how much it meant to him. Is it staged, the picture? Probably. Like I did, they all just sat down and so I'm going to read this, but I don't care. I mean, it's still, it's for him, it's to say, this is how much this means to me, is that we all have the ability in our lifetime to do this, to read each other's work. So there, that's what brings me a lot of meaning.
That is beautiful. Thank you. And thanks for coming on and talking about your book. So, my last question is, what is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
Wow. I kind of feel guilty sometimes that I go back to the same answer when a question is anything like this, but I think it's like cliches, right? Why do we still, I still say cliches. Why? Because they're true. And I think it's the same with this. The answer is true. So I think I have to say it. I would say if you want to live a meaningful life, you need to, and I'm going to say it in the order, but I'm going to say this has been my experience. You need to find things you're passionate about, start doing them so that you can uncover your purpose. So I said that in that specific order because I hear people say all the time, let me help you find your purpose. I think we uncover our purpose, it's in us. But I also, my experience is you can't jump from nothing and be feeling unworthy and like I have no reason to be here to purpose. I don't think it works that way because purpose is an intangible that, in my experience, it's the why you're doing it. And how do you figure out why you're doing it until you're doing it? So to me, the gateway to purpose is passion. So like if you love photography, if you love podcasting, if you love interviewing people, that's the what, that's the passion. So find that thing you like to do every day. And my experience is over time, the purpose will reveal itself and you'll forget that you didn't even know it before. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's why I'm doing this. Because like stand-up comedy, when I first started, it was to perform. Like I was like, I hated it, by the way. I was terrified of speaking and terrified of comedy, but I kept going back because something told me to keep going back. But I wasn't getting laughs. So I was like, at first I went, I'm going to be a comic. I'm going to make money as a rock star comic. And then I realized this isn't going to happen. So what happened was after doing it for a long enough time without getting laughs, I finally realized why I was doing it. And it was because I knew that when I watched comedy, I didn't think about the crap going on in my life. So then I realized even when I'm bombing, as we call it in comedy, even if I'm getting no laughs, but somebody might be laughing at me and not with me, it was still making them forget about their day. That's the why. I was maybe making their day better is the why, but the what was performing stand-up comedy. And that can change, by the way, like it can change from, it could be comedy today, it could be knitting tomorrow, it could be surfing the next day. I find your passions can change a lot, but your why rarely does. So once you figure out why you're doing it, that usually stays the same. It could be to bring smiles to people's faces. It could be to create a positive ripple in other people's lives. It could be to create an invisible impact in other people's lives. Once you find that, I find that rarely changes. But how you get there, like mine started with comedy, then it moved to speaking, then it moved to writing, then it moved to podcasting. All of those are different whats, but the why has always been the same. So that, again, another long tangent to say, if you ask me, what you did, what would I want to leave people with about how to live a fulfilling, fantastic life? I would say figure out your purpose and you'll be living a fantastic life. And I call it taking vitamin P for purpose and passion. And I always say it's the vitamin you can't buy in the stores, but it might be the most important vitamin you'll ever take.
Love it. Thank you so much, Corey.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Yeah, we'll talk to you again soon.
Amazing.